Good evening and welcome to the last of the Canterbury Residents Group interviews with the party political candidates for Canterbury, those who would be your MP. Before we start, I'd just like to quickly thank Advision TV for the awesome setup that they provided us with for this interview, Bow Concept for the beautiful furniture that we are using, and Orbital Internet Group who provided us with a great high-speed internet so that we can stream this out to you live. Rosie Duffield is representing the Labour Party to hold on to her position as the MP for Canterbury. And in a moment, we're going to ask questions in two parts. The first part will be 7 questions that Rosie and the other candidates have already seen. And then we will ask questions that have come in on the live stream that you can ask as you're watching in the comments below. So if anything comes up, feel free to put it in the comments. We won't have time to ask every question, but we'll try our best to cover a nice broad range of topics. Rosie Duffield, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this. So we're going to start with a question. Those of you who have been watching so far will be familiar with the questions, but we're going to be starting with a question from Jim Titheridge, who posted, our local council has seen budgets cut to the bone. Yeah. Will we see a reversal of this policy in the next government if your party get into power?
Yeah, we've all had enough of austerity. We've had nearly a decade of it. And one of the biggest effects of that has been the sort of decimation of council budgets. They're not getting enough money from central government. And even though I'm in this weird position of being the only kind of Labour representative here, and I'm working with a Conservative City Council and a Conservative County Council, they have actually told me in meetings they'd like me to lobby for more money for specific things. And that's weird when I'm doing that, you know, in the same party as them. So I have had to do that. And I think there are things that they'd like to do, and they've really had their wings clipped. But, you know, it's funny that when they do have a budget, they'll prioritise things like the multi-storey car park, which is now costing, after the initial quote of 4.5 million, £9 million. So I think they need to be better at budgeting as well.
And so there is an allocation in the Labour manifesto going forward to increase councils' budgets.
I don't know if there's a line on that, I have to be honest. I have read it, but I'm kind of tired. But we absolutely will end austerity, and that's part of it. Councils do need to take more things in-house and be more in control and be able to spend their budgets more. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. So, as I'm sure you're well aware, Canterbury is a very engaged constituency. Yeah. Lots of people keeping on top of what the council are doing and that sort of thing. And you mentioned car parks a moment ago. Amanda Bates asks, do you support the Save Wincheap Water Meadows campaign? And please, can you expand on other environmental policies and your views on environment locally?
I've supported that campaign from the beginning, and last time I checked, there were nearly 3,500 signatures of local people who also support the fact that we don't want a park and ride there. There are loads of alternative places to look at, and that just isn't the place. It's a beautiful area. It's got wildlife. I've been walking there for years and years. My friends and family enjoy that spot. It's so beautiful. If you just look on Twitter, you'll see their account. I often retweet the beautiful photos of that area. Why would anyone want to concrete over it? Certainly the residents, and I'm one of them because I live in that ward, do not want it concreted over. You know, nobody that I know in Canterbury would agree to doing that. So I don't know why the city councillors have voted against us stopping that happening. The people in the city, the Labour councillors, have always voted to stop that scheme. And one Conservative councillor voted with us who doesn't live in the city. But it's an absolute travesty and nobody wants it. Other environmental issues, there's so many. But the air quality here is really dire. It's dangerous. It has been for a long time. And for many, many years, we've been campaigning, me, the Green Party, other Labour Party activists, and the Liberals, to get air monitoring equipment that hasn't worked for years and years here. So we need the particulates that are the most dangerous monitored and properly evaluated, and they haven't been. That equipment that stands by the side of the road is largely redundant, and it's about time that we stepped up and got something done about it.
So on a local level, environment to you is sounds very much about air quality and particulates from cars.
Yeah.
One argument for the expansion of the park and ride is that we need to have more spaces to allow people to use the park and ride service.
Yeah.
If you were to accept that, where else would we put a park and ride extension?
There's loads of other places. There's brownfield sites. People have talked about the Serco site, but actually it's condemned at the moment. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to clean up that and make it a viable site, but it is another option. Local people know all about this, and we should be listening to residents and going back and thinking again, rather than just this really easy, quick option, which doesn't work. But yeah, of course we need more park and ride sites. That's a way forward to stop people bringing in cars and clogging up Canterbury even more. We need to look at electric buses. I've had meetings with Stagecoach about that, and while we're on buses, young persons travel cards are absolutely excruciatingly expensive and just impossible for many parents to afford. I'm constantly writing to Kent County Council and the City Council about that, and that needs doing, urgently looking at.
Right, so moving on to a question from Adam Friend. Okay. Adam asked, Canterbury is a Remain constituency.
It is indeed.
How do your political beliefs align with this? And if you had to vote on the issue, would you vote with the majority of your constituents, even if you disagreed? Now, you've got a very clear Brexit policy yourself, your Rosie Duffield's policy. You're an ardent Remainer, and you're not shy to remind people that.
No.
So how do you reconcile that with the fact that 50% of your, give or take, are leavers?
I think it was really important to sort of pick a side, and representing this area, it's absolutely potentially devastating to our area. And even if I know that nearly half of our constituency voted to leave, I've got to do what I think is right, and I will spend 5, 10, however many minutes on a doorstep explaining to someone why I think it was an absolute disaster for this area. We do not want Kent turned into a car park. I'm also the only Remain MP in Kent, so I go to many of those meetings, the Operation Brock meetings, where we're talking to Michael Gove. I'm explaining what the problems are with some of our particular problems about, say, the Whitstable oysters. They've got a very short shelf life. If there's any delay for them getting over to Dover, because we send an awful lot of those products to France, things like that. The nuclear medicines department are really worried at KNC about the isotopes having a short window. People are worried about supplies of insulin. So I talk about that a lot with the other Kent MPs, and whilst they might roll their eyes in meetings, they stick to the party lines. I've never been shy of not sticking to party lines, because this is more important than that. And yes, 55% of this constituency voted to remain, but I also represent the EU citizens that prop up our health service, our university, and our friends or neighbours, and couldn't vote. So I take that very seriously.
You also represent a large fishing community in Whitstable.
Absolutely.
A community which is known for its leave views.
Yeah.
Have you spoken to the fishing community, and how do you reconcile?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult issue, actually, because our small fishing fleets were never consulted by Michael Gove when he sort of considered this and did his white paper on it. They were talking to people like, the Youngs and the Princes up in Grimsby, those kind of giant manufacturers of the fishing industry, but never our small fishing fleets. So the problems that they have can and should have been sorted out while we're part of the EU. We still are, and I haven't noticed Michael Gove going and saying to them, what are your problems? They have problems with pulse fishing. They have problems with, having to throw back the catch. So I'm kind of quite up to speed with some of those issues. And I don't know that they'll ever agree with me on this, but I would really like to negotiate those things in Europe, staying in and representing them, because that is my job. And it is a horrible issue. But, I think we could have a good dialogue and try and get somewhere whilst we're still in the EU.
So a question now from Helena Godman. Again, I know this is something as our incumbent MP that's been very much part of your agenda. What are you going to do to reopen the Kent and Canterbury accident and emergency? And what are your other thoughts about healthcare in Kent?
I don't think I've got long enough to go. We need an AN in Canterbury. I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer. It shut on the 19th of June, or the urgent care centre shut on the 19th of June 2017. It was a Monday, I remember it very well. And the last head of the trust, Matthew Kershaw, told me and staff it would be closed for 12 weeks. It was pretty obvious about a couple of weeks into that just wasn't true. He's since moved on to the King's Fund, actually. But the staff were told their rotas were all being changed at the last minute. Many nurses I know were having to get buses into the middle of the night to go to different hospitals they weren't living near. Patients having to get taxis in the middle of the night sometimes cost them £60, including students. It's an absolute disaster. We serve the biggest kind of catchment area of the 3 hospitals, and we don't have an A&E. I've also been briefed on various terrorist incident possibilities. The council has spent money on those pop-up bollard things. And what if a disaster like that was to happen in Canterbury? Of course, I hope it absolutely won't. But where are they going to go? They're going to go down that one road, one-sided road to Thanet or Ashford, and it's going to take a long time. So we need an A&E.
And is that something that Labour are promising?
We can't promise that. Other MPs or other MP candidates will say, I promise you a new hospital. It isn't up to me. It's not up to Matt Hancock. The government handed that decision making over to NHS England, and the trust have got to work with NHS England. I'll carry on harassing them. I've been having loads of meetings with the trust over the years, since before I was elected. Other people have said that they've been campaigning for the hospital here. I'm not sure if you've stood in 7 seats around the country why you would choose Canterbury to campaign. And there's no evidence that the Conservative candidate has ever lobbied for a hospital here, but I certainly have, and I will continue to do so because it needs sorting out as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. A question from Kerry. Kerry Miles asks, carers who look after their loved ones with severe disabilities and illnesses are paid £66 a week.
Yeah.
Would you agree that £66 a week is simply impossible to live on and is unacceptable in this modern age?
Of course, it's £1.79 an hour.
And where will the extra money come to increase that should a Labour government?
There's so much that we need to do, and Barbara Keeley, our care shadow minister, is working with agencies like We Care. The We Care campaign started off in Kent. I'm very proud of Katie Stiles, who started it and works with the Motor Neurone Disease Foundation as well. I'm on the select committee for work and pensions, so I know quite a lot about this, and I get to question the Work and Pensions Minister about these things very often. We just need to implement the carers strategy. They asked a very long time ago whether the government would put that into place. It's carers saying what they need and what they want, and we need to implement it as soon as possible. That's an urgent thing, actually. I can't think of a single reason we haven't done that.
And so just to clarify, you're saying that the carers allowance needs to go up.
Absolutely,
and that is something that has been costed into the manifesto, has it?
I don't know about that, sorry. I don't know if it has been costed in, but it's an urgent priority for me and for people on the Work and Pensions Committee. And I can't think of why we wouldn't value our carers. In the last Conservative manifesto, they made very clear that they expected people to stay at home and care for their relatives for free. That's not okay. You can't survive on that. People I know that are carers, 1 or 2 hospital trips by train if they've got hospital appointments in London and their money's gone. I mean, that's not okay. Why are we valuing them so lowly?
Neil Fisher has asked a question about banking and about the economy. A lot of people addressing the fact that Labour were in government when the banking crisis started. Yeah. He's asked, nothing has been done to prevent a repeat of the banking crisis in 9 years. How will your party address the loopholes previously exploited? Do the Labour Party have a strong plan for tackling these issues at big economy level?
Yeah, I mean, basically, manifestos are a kind of wish list for all parties. They're saying if we get into government, we absolutely have to do something about all these issues. Our number one priority has got to be ending the damage that austerity has caused for 10 years. The banking system needs to be better regulated, doesn't it? We can't have people essentially gambling on the markets all of the time with no regulation. That absolutely has to be looked at and has to be stopped. And the effect on the housing market that it has and all kinds of, our standing in the world globally, financially. But it wasn't the Labour government that caused the banking crisis. It was a global financial banking crisis, obviously. And it wasn't the Labour government spending money on schools, on the NHS, on housing that caused the banking crisis. So we can still spend all of the money that we've said we can spend. That's a kind of, desirable level of just undoing austerity. And austerity hasn't worked. We've seen the poorest in society punished for the global banking crisis. Why? They didn't cause it. And austerity hasn't worked. Our debt has trillions of pounds now. So what was it for?
So to just bring it back to the banks, then you're saying that there needs to be tighter regulations.
Absolutely, yeah, of course.
Is there not a risk when you start to tighten or even over tighten regulations on investment that actually you're going to undo the work that's being done to reinvest into the economy?
No, I don't think so. I think most people want this country to prosper and do well, and we have to maintain that balance. Of course, we need to encourage people to invest. We need to make life easier for small businesses, so we can't charge them the same kind of rates that bigger businesses are paying and corporations. Our corporation tax is the lowest in Europe. We need to raise that. But I think if you talk to most investors, they want to invest in this country as a whole. They don't just want this sort of have and have not. They're not evil bankers. I think they would welcome regulation.
Okay, moving on to the last of the 7 questions that you've already had a chance to think about. And again, this is a topic which is frequently brought up in Canterbury Residents Group. Homelessness is something that people see with their own eyes on the street. And even though this is being referred to as the Brexit general election, in Canterbury Residents Group, I see so many people actually talking about social issues, and homelessness is one of those main ones. Lynn asks, it breaks my heart to see so many people sleeping on the streets in Canterbury and now Whitstable, especially as temperatures plummet. What's the Labour Party's plans to reduce homelessness?
Well, we had reduced homelessness so much to such a low level when we were in government. No level of homelessness is acceptable, obviously. When I go to Catching Lives and Porchlight, and not just because I've just moved into the area for a couple of weeks and think it's a good look, I regularly meet with them, obviously. They're my friends are volunteers there. The number 2, there are 2 things that they say are the kind of answer to curing homelessness, if you like, and that is better mental health provision and social housing. We don't have either of those things in good enough measure here, not just in Canterbury but across the board. The City Council haven't invested in social housing. We need to simply build social housing or council houses, and we need that so urgently. We're shipping, my office deals with cases all of the time where there's overcrowding, damp. We're talking about bringing East Kent housing services back into the City Council control, and I think that's probably a good thing, because then the council are accountable, not in an arm's length kind of a way, but directly accountable. And I meet with Deborah Upton, the chair of that association, which she allows us to take cases directly to her. She's intervened for us, which is great. But this council don't have enough provision. So when we have families that are overcrowded, 2, 3 children, 1 on the way in 1 bedroom, they are shipped out to Medway, places where they have no connections. If you're a woman fleeing domestic violence, for example, that's absolutely terrible. You don't want to be ending up somewhere where you can't live.
And clearly housing plays a massive part in dealing with homelessness, but so does also mental health,
absolutely.
Drug addiction. What are the Labour Party's plans to tackle homelessness via those routes, via dealing with root cause?
We have to invest in mental health. We said in our last manifesto and this one, mental health spending for the NHS has to be ring-fenced, because at the moment that money has been leaking to prop up the NHS for other things where it's kind of not got enough money. So it has to be a priority that it's ring-fenced. We have children waiting to see just their first initial CAMS assessment here. I mean, this is my bread and butter. It's what I do every single day as your MP. Candidate. We basically try and get an appointment for someone whose child, has been desperate for kind of 18 months, 2 years, just for that initial assessment. We've got children talking about feeling suicidal. What's more important than investing in mental health? We know that, there are so many triggers for that, but sleeping on the streets, what could be worse? And who's sleeping on the streets with a drug problem suddenly can be cured? But, if you're sleeping in a shop doorway, freezing, literally sometimes to death, you need somewhere to go. Catching Lives, thank God for them, and thank God for Porchlight. And they've got charities working with them to get people off drugs. But, we need to help them long term.
The other candidates also, put heaps of praise on Catching Lives and Porchlight, and deservedly so. But in an ideal world, they shouldn't exist.
Of course not. My friend Paul Todd, who works for Catching Lives, says to me, every time I go, he says to me, I hope next time you come visit, more and more of us don't have a job, because we need not to be having to exist. I mean, of course it's true. You know, it'd be lovely to not need Catching Lives in Porchlight, but I'm very grateful that they're there and they do a brilliant job.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the first half, where the questions have been pre-sent in. And now we're going to ask the questions that you have been posting on the feed. Keep posting them. Like I said earlier, we won't have a chance to do them all, and we want to cover as broad a range of topics as possible. So do post your questions below, and we'll see if we can get to them. But first of all, a question from Rachel. Harking back to a previous answer, this is about housing. Where would you build new housing in Canterbury and Whitstable? Every time that there's an attempt to put up a housing development, it seems that it receives a raft of opposition.
Of course, yeah.
How can you build new housing if you're always giving in to that opposition?
Okay, well, this city council has just sort of waved through tons and tons of houses, thousands of houses, without looking at the joined up picture. So without looking at infrastructure and transport, and in fact the effect on air pollution, which is already at dangerous levels. So we need a different approach to housing. I know of local developers that are always coming to see me saying they can't get a foot in the door, they can't get a meeting with the city council, even though they're proposing social housing. They're also proposing something under section 106, so a new GP surgery or a new school, and the city council do have a really odd approach to who they allow to kind of meet with them about developers. They seem to have their chosen few favourites. I'm not sure how that works, but we need to look at the whole picture, and of course we can't just chuck houses up, but social housing is what we need. The houses that are called affordable in Canterbury start at about 300,000, the new ones. That's not affordable to most people I know and have known in my 22 years of living here. So we need a whole different approach.
But we still also need to find places.
Yes, of course
and
we do.
Locations for
but
it.
Thousands of houses that local people can't afford isn't the answer. Social housing as part of those developments, or talking to local residents more and not just waving through the houses, and not just putting consultations out which you barely advertise, usually at Christmas in July when less people are likely to be engaged with those websites.
The homelessness is something which everyone agrees needs to be sorted with immediacy.
Yeah.
Is it not the case that the importance of building these houses means that the process needs to be faster than normal because we've got a lot of catching up to do?
No, I don't think so. I think we've got to do it properly, not just fast. We've got to look at carbon neutral house building, and there are so many people locally who are trying, like I said, to get in front of the city council to talk to them about their schemes. I don't know why that's a problem. We need to look at where people are living, how much it costs, what the transport is, what the access to local schools is. It needs to be more, we need to think more modern, in a more modern way about it, and this city council do seem stuck in the past.
Okay. Question from Maisie. I believe Maisie's asked this on previous feeds with our other candidates. Maisie asks, what will Labour do to improve access to mental health services in Canterbury?
We absolutely need to prop them up with more money. I'm afraid it's a boring answer, but we have to do it. I know people that work for CAMS here. I know how hard it is that every few months, because it's put out to tender by the government, there's a different provider of the CAMS service. So, one half of the year, I'm thinking of one particular friend who's a psychiatrist for that organisation. She'll be working for Surrey Council or whatever, and then a whole different authority. So the rules change, the money changes. I know admin staff at George Tower House, the turnaround is really quick because the morale is so low, and it's mainly because they know people are on these waiting lists for so long. Children and families are desperate, so we have to put more money into that service, and we have to listen to those experts, the people that run it, not just giving them money, but how would the money be better spent. I'm not an expert in that. Those psychologists are. We need to listen to them and be led by them.
So sounds expensive, and it sounds like we need funding. Is that from borrowing or from raising taxes? Or
either, but we're only going to rate, the Labour Party are only proposing raising more tax on the top 5% of earners. So 95% of people in the UK who work won't have to pay any more tax. But there are loads of ways. Borrowing isn't the end of the world. It's so important to invest in people, and people with a mental health issue, which is most of us at some points of our life, deserve that help when they need it. They don't deserve to wait 2 years. We know the suicide rates are going up. It is urgent and it's important. So let's spend money on it if we need to. Yeah.
So, bit of a change of tack, talking about council tax and students. So, Martin asks, do you think it's right that students are exempt from paying council tax? So, in Canterbury, massive student population, a huge amount of council's budget comes from what it raises via council tax, goes central, then divided out. But clearly, with a city this size, with this many students in, that many people not paying council tax, that leaves a big hole. So is that right that we don't charge students council tax?
I think so. I've got a student son, he's in his second year, he's 20, he couldn't afford it. I mean, where's the money supposed to come from? Obviously the students use the local services. They also put an awful lot back into our economy and our community. What we'd like, ideally, is for them to stay here and have a good job and be able to afford a home. But a lot of the students I know have to leave, have to get jobs in London, and they stay in, places where there are 3 or 4 people in a house because they can't afford anything less than that. But here, I mean, I don't see how people can afford it. The Labour Party have said we'll give back the maintenance grant and we'll scrap tuition fees. Students start off with a debt that's, even if it's psychological and they never earn enough to pay it back, I'm afraid they can't afford to pay council tax, even if they think they should. But a lot of our students give back by volunteering. We don't talk about this enough, but UKC have a voluntary programme. I've gone to the Umbrella Centre so many times. Every time I'm there are students leading groups and volunteering and putting into the community.
I mean, volunteering, the people at Canterbury are amazing at volunteering. But it still does leave a hole in the finances where in a city that is full of students, that hole and growing, that hole's only going to deepen. So are there any plans to somehow claw back money that's been lost from student properties via council tax? I honestly don't think that's
viable. I don't think they can afford it. I mean, look at their private rents sometimes here because there's not enough accommodation to go around. I don't think students can afford that. If they get the maintenance grant, maybe we can look at that again. But I don't know many really wealthy students in Canterbury. A lot of them have to get jobs just to kind of make ends meet. And it's a struggle doing all the work that they have to do. And most students are really hardworking, by the way. They know their deadlines are coming up and they've invested in their education. They know how important it is and it's their way into the future. So I don't think students can afford council tax, sorry.
Okay. Question from Andrew. Andrew asks, if the Conservatives win on the 12th, what policies in their manifesto will you be most vocal against?
Wow, that is a brilliant question, actually, because it makes you think for a minute. Hang on. Okay. What I've always said since I got into Parliament, and actually before I got into Parliament, was I would like to set fire to the legislation called the 2-child limit, or the rape clause, which says that if a woman applying for universal credit benefit has more than 2 children, she has to disclose that those children are the cause of rape to get any money. And it's probably the most disgusting legislation I've ever heard of for so many reasons. I'd like to get rid of that, get rid of bedroom tax, change the universal credit system completely, and Labour Party are going to scrap it because we see the misery of that every single day in my office. And again, on the Work and Pensions Committee, that's my bread and butter. It's what I do every single week when I'm in front of the ministers. So those are the kind of things, just for a start. There are so many others, though.
And so I can assume that then if the Conservatives don't get a majority and Labour do, then those things would be something that would happen almost instantly?
Absolutely, and I will fight for that to happen. Yes, totally.
Ben asks, what will you do to support the visitor economy in Canterbury, and will you support the Canterbury bid, the business improvement district?
Yeah, our bid, I mean, yes, there is some controversies with how much the bid have to charge some local businesses, and I know that's an issue for some here, but I think they do more good than harm, and they're always around, aren't they? If visitors need to go up to someone, they know the people in the uniform are the people to ask. Genuinely, they're such lovely people. They don't do the job for the money, believe me, but they're just really nice. The bid does an awful lot.
The bid levy as a concept?
If people can afford it, I think maybe they need to think about the prices of that sometimes if people are struggling, because we've seen so many shops shut in Canterbury. It's really sad to kind of, when I get to go shopping in the high street, hardly ever, but there's always another business shutting down. It's just really awful. But the tourism industry, oh my goodness, we've got Visit Kent, which are brilliant. Visit Canterbury has tried to be started up a few times, but it's quite tricky to get these things kind of going again. I talked to local hoteliers who are independent. This is the bread and butter of Canterbury. It's, as you know. I mean, it's such a huge part of our economy, with a gateway to London. So people coming over from European countries spend money on our riverboat tours and our local independent cafes, going to Canterbury Tales, all of those things.
That economy
it's
is really important too.
I meet with those people.
Will there be an increase in the level of support from government?
It would be lovely if we could do that, and if we could reverse Brexit so that we know that those people are going to come and spend money here, then even better. It's a key part of Canterbury's economy, so of course I support them.
You think that Brexit will have a negative impact on that?
Well, it already has had. So people I know that run the riverboat tours, and there's 2 or 3 little boat companies in Canterbury, as you know, have already seen bookings taking off, sort of going down, sorry. Some of the independent B&Bs, there's a couple in Windsheep, have seen bookings from their regular clients in Belgium and France go down already, because people are so uncertain about what's going on, and we need those people here spending money.
But you really think that people will stop visiting?
I know the numbers have already gone down, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to move on to now a question from Anthony. Anthony asks, what part do you see Canterbury playing in Labour's green revolution? People of Canterbury are very engaged in green issues.
Yes, and it's brilliant because the local, obviously I want as many Labour councillors on the council as possible. I was thrilled in May when we got 10 up from 4. But I would really like to see a green councillor, because I think if we have the green agenda up there where everyone can see and where they can hold other parties to account, that'd be really fantastic. But Canterbury, as you said, is very aware of these issues. And, Henry Stanton was a great candidate in the last election, but they have stood down, and I owe them being as green as I possibly can, and I think I have been. My own children would very much make it known if they didn't think that my green agenda was good enough. Our green industrial revolution, our green plans take up 16 pages of our manifesto. It's the first section. It's what is more important than that for the future. I joined the school strikes. Where does it fit in with Canterbury? Apart from the things air pollution is horrific here. It really is. We need to have more park and rides, but in a different way. Electric cars, electric charging points, where are they? We're a modern city with young people wanting to move here. If we're building all these new houses, we need to commit to the electric charging points. There's so much more we can do. We need renewable energy. We don't need to rely as much on imported electricity. I know there's been an issue with the solar park. I know that some of Whitstable are really unhappy with the size of it, but we have to stop relying on fossil fuels.
The solar park, surely a key part in a green revolution.
Yeah.
Solar
it's a real
power
divided issue in Canterbury, because I love the idea of a solar park here, but it will be the biggest in the country, and I think people are really worried about the Graveney Marsh and some of the bird life. So we have to get a compromise somehow, because we have to invest in renewable energy.
And you think you can get that?
I'm going to work really hard to do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so we have another question in. This one about the EU, again, unsurprisingly. Christian asks, assuming we leave the EU next year, what global role do you envision Canterbury and the UK playing? So, assuming Brexit goes ahead, assuming that for you, assuming the worst, where do you envision Canterbury going from there?
Okay, I think if we leave the EU, I really hope we don't, because I do not want Kent to be a car park. And the government's own documents that I have pored over tirelessly show that that's kind of inevitable. We're going to be a giant car park.
And you're referring to Brock and
Operation
Stack?
Brock, Operation Yellowhammer, Stack. All of it is going to be pretty awful for this part of the world. So I would have to absolutely go and try and get business and try and get investment from other areas and try and work, trying to get European companies to still want to know us and still invest in us and still take part in those research programs that we kind of have taken for granted with our universities. Dr. Mo Sackle and the Brain Injury Unit, who does incredible groundbreaking work, has those research relationships across Europe. I don't know what we'll do if they dry up or if people aren't carrying on with that. There are so many levels at which that would really harm Canterbury, our economy and our way of life.
So would it be fair to say that you don't really see much positivity if Brexit happens?
I don't see any for our part of Kent, and I don't at all disrespect the people that voted to leave, and I absolutely understand why they did it, but my job is to protect our economy, our way of life in this part of the world. I'd be terrible if I didn't.
But you may find yourself in a position with a Tory Conservative government, and
I just have to work harder to get investment in this part of the world. That's my job. Yeah.
So a question in from Rachel. Again, coming back to local independent businesses. So Canterbury High Street, full of local independent shops. The whole of the constituency full of self-employed people, full of small creative businesses. Whether or not Brexit happens, regardless of that, those businesses are going to need a significant amount of support in order to keep doing what they do. Where's that support going to come from?
Business rates and rent in Canterbury, as you know, are pretty awful, and we need to look at that kind of fairly urgently. We need to invest in local businesses and persuade them. The Labour Party have got some plans about loaning to small businesses. I know a lot of banks have been scared of doing that lately, obviously, but unless we trust those people and invest in them, we're talking about the moving of the Canterbury City Council offices, and people have been saying locally, why don't we make those a hub for local businesses? Kind of decent rents, the council could invest in those spaces, more pop-up shops maybe. We do have to look at the way the high street is changing. I've been working with Visa in Parliament, who've got some great schemes and ideas on this. Tankerton, I'm very proud, was shortlisted for Independent High Street of the Year, just missed out. They would have got a big investment if they'd won that. So we have got these pockets of totally independent bits of the high street, and you know, I support local businesses wholeheartedly, Mademoiselle being my favourite. You know, and local cafes, my team will try and go to those rather than the chains, although they're great as well. But yeah, we need to make business rates and rents here. The rents here are really expensive, and it's really hard for someone young starting up a business to invest in that if they can't see
dropping
returns.
those business rates. Obviously, rent, you know, is privately controlled. Dropping the business rates, okay, I see that it's feasible. It's going to reduce the pot of money to spend elsewhere, though, isn't it?
Which is why we need more money from central government, because we're investing in local people. I don't want to see local people, especially new young graduates who are involved in the creative industries here, go elsewhere to invest because they can't afford to be here. So maybe the City Council needs to look at loaning businesses. I know they're going to say they haven't got enough money, but maybe looking at topping up their rent. If government and a Labour government will invest in those businesses, that's going to help everyone, isn't it? We need to keep people local, we need to encourage our graduates to stay, and we need to encourage that creative atmosphere, which we are well known for.
The Conservative Party obviously tend to position themselves as the party of business, the party of small business in particular, and they would say that actually Labour's plans don't support small businesses. Things like increasing rates in order to pay for various other, you know, important policies. Isn't it? It is difficult to reconcile that taking away from one pot to put in another.
Yeah, it is. It's a really difficult balancing act. But as the local MP here, I see the effect on local businesses. We don't all have to agree with our national policies on everything. So I would have to lobby a Labour government to support my local businesses. That's my job. That's what I'm here for. I know so many people here that have local businesses. So they are my friends and my neighbours, you know, and I need to support them no matter what. And that means nudging our team, if we're in government, to support them and just make them aware of what the people here are going through, if that's an issue. So, yeah.
So the next question is a question that is, you know, people are asking a lot in the residents group. The question of anti-Semitism around surrounding the Labour Party. Greg asks, can you stand in good conscience for a party you described as intentionally anti-Semitic?
I'm really glad that Greg, the Conservative chair in Canterbury, is asking so many questions today. I mean, not at all biased, but it is a valid question. And just like Islamophobia in the Tory party, we absolutely have to be upfront, honest, and get on with doing something about it. The Labour Party have been far too slow to deal with those cases that have been brought forward and brought to their attention, including locally, I have to say. So our job is to get rid of anti-Semitic members. That's the first job. Get rid of them quickly, and to change our culture if it is attracting those people. I fear that the report that's coming out in early spring will in fact find that we have got a problem, a systemic problem in our party, and it's shameful. It's not okay.
You've been quite outspoken about it.
Yeah.
But how can you run under the banner of Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm not Jeremy Corbyn, and I've never had a personal conversation with him about what his beliefs about this are. I don't believe he personally is anti-Semitic, but I think under his leadership we haven't done enough, and we can't shy away from that. And I'm not going to pretend everything's okay, because that's profoundly dishonest. We need to tackle it. We need to tackle it fast. I'm a proud affiliate member of the Jewish Labour Movement. I work with them tirelessly. I speak at their events, and I won't stop, and I won't be quiet about it just because it's awkward.
If you had a chance, would you speak directly to Jeremy Corbyn
yes,
about it?
And I've spoken to all the people around him that are in charge of this, and I won't stop doing that, absolutely, yeah.
There's a question that's coming from Andrew.
Okay.
Going back to the environment, is there a Labour plan to plant more trees?
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing? Yes, I've totally forgotten the figures. We said some crazy number, like 600 million or something that we're planting. That would be wonderful. I don't know how realistic that is, but of course we need to plant more trees. It's part of our green industrial promises and our green industrial revolution. We need to plant trees, we need to cut emissions, we need to make ourselves carbon zero by 2050. I'd like it to be 2030. But yeah, of course that would be really nice. Yeah, I'd love to plant more trees.
We haven't got long left, so just one or two more questions. What do you think about a Corbyn-led government propped up by the SNP? Asked Jake.
Okay, that's a really weird idea, isn't it? I don't know if that could
possibility.
work.
Yeah,
it is possible, yeah. But there are so many kind of possibilities. We don't know what's going to happen on the 12th. I guess we might have to go into coalition with another party. That would probably cause problems for my Scottish colleagues, because my Scottish Labour colleagues obviously voted against independence, and the SNP are all about independence.
So would that mean that Labour's position might have to shift on that?
I kind of, for my Scottish colleagues' sake, I hope not. I'm very much pro the union. I don't know how we would square that circle. I do work with my SNP colleagues on a number of issues. They're actually quite lefty in some of the areas that we work together on. I'm not sure how we would square that circle, but we'd have to thrash that out before we got anywhere, wouldn't we? Yeah.
Okay, so final two questions. Okay. Question from Lucy: what should take the place of universal benefit, universal credit? So you're I'm not a fan of universal credit. How do you deal with that? I'm
not going to pretend to be someone who can design a benefit system. That is not at all my expertise. But as someone who's been dependent on benefits as a single mum for a very long time, the tax credit legacy system that the Conservatives are always slagging off worked brilliantly for me. Thank you very much. I knew that I was getting money in every 2 weeks. I would get my salary. I would get my tax credits. I would be able to afford food for my children. I could budget, and I knew what was happening. Universal credit doesn't work like that.
People have
had to. I'd love to scrap it, because although it was a great idea in its infancy, it hasn't worked. The Tories have had nearly a decade to sort it out. First of all, I think Duncan Smith's computer system failed for several years. Then there's the problem of split payments not happening, so women in dodgy situations that aren't safe don't get the money on their own. There's so many problems with it. We need to scrap it.
I guess though the question is there something to replace it? It's all very well scrapping. I think most people would even agree that it's not worked.
We have to come up with something, and we have to come up with something fast, and we have to phase it out in a way that would really help people. But a 5-week wait is unacceptable. People are starving and going to food banks. Working families are going to food banks. They just need that top up of universal credit, and it isn't working. It hasn't worked. I've done lots of inquiries with my committee, including people who are going to work in sex industries just to survive, which is awful.
Thank you very much. One final question. How have you found the election campaign so far?
Exhausting, because unlike the other candidates, I've come straight from my job, which is a 7-day-a-week job, to this election. It's great. I love the fact that I've been at home for the longest time in ages, but I'm still doing my work.
Felt very different from the last election campaign?
I suppose politics have changed just in that 2.5 years, but I was elected 2.5 years ago for a 5-year period, so I hope people will still elect me to do the rest of my job. I'm the only local candidate, so being at home is wonderful. Of course it's great. I get to spend more time with my children, my friends and my family and my team here, so it's been brilliant fun, but exhausting.
Rosie Duffield, thank you very much for taking part.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. All 3 of these interviews will be available to watch again on the Residents Group. I hope you've enjoyed taking part. I think that this has been a really interesting experiment in local democracy. It's unique, and it's something that I hope that you've had some benefits from and that you've really enjoyed as well. Just before we go, I would just like to say thank you to a few people, to Edd Vision TV for the amazing setup that we've got here today. Really putting Canterbury on the map as doing things in a really professional manner, I think. Bow Concept, Furniture Shop in Canterbury, who provided us with our set, and Orbital Internet Group, who provided us with great high-speed internet so that we can stream this to you live today. I'd also personally like to thank Matthew, Alex, Joe, Sam and Diana, who are the team around me, who have supported me through putting these on and bringing them to you. And I'd just finally like to thank everyone on the Canterbury Residents Group. It's an honour to run the group for you and to have done these interviews. So I do hope that you'll stick around and enjoy the group as much as I do. But for now, thank you very much for watching and good night.